Mr. Rajkumar Roy, MD and CEO, Empire Energy, Mr. Sunil Badesra, Country Head, Sungrow India Private Limited, and also Ms. Shilpa Urhikar, National Head, Domestic Sterling and Wilson, Renewable Energy Limited. The panel discussion will be on decoding the future trends in energy transition, and to moderate this panel, I am joined by Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor, Business Today TV. On the stage, please. Huge round of applause.
Very good afternoon and a warm welcome once again to everybody here, my panel and all the guests and viewers who are tuning in on the various platforms of Business Today Multiverse, including Business Today Television and on Business Today In, as well as Business Today on YouTube and other platforms. My panel here is a very eclectic panel, very well-chosen panel, and I would say we'll be able to get a mix of views in the 45 odd minutes that we have on this discussion today. And since we are talking about future trends, we'll try and keep the focus on the future, and the future is always better. At least that is the mantra that most Indians live by. We look at the future and are able to go beyond the present. I'm going to start with Mr. Ramesh in terms of the subject for our energy transition. Transition is a pretty simple word, but it involves a lot of painstaking detail. Moving out of what is a carbon-fed economy is an imperative for India. It's also backed by the need from a climate point of view, but it's a massive cost. And globally, while the developed nations have been talking about this transition, they haven't really put their money behind where their mouth is as far as helping countries like India achieve this transition in a sustainable and fast manner. But that's the broader picture. What I really want to ask you about is how critical is the role of finance in India's energy transition towards a green, renewable, sustainable future? Mr. Ramesh. Yeah, here you go with the mic.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Just hold it closer.
Yeah. Thank you. Wonderful to see all the ladies and gentlemen, who's who of the industry here. Of course, it all starts with finance. So, I naturally expected this could be the first question for this panel discussion. To give a context, what are the financing, requirement we are looking at for energy, green energy or clean energy? If we just look at the targets given or undertaken by Government of India, is humongous. The kind of energy transition declaration of having 50% of energy requirement by 2030 to be met by non-fossil fuels. So that's about nearly 500 gigawatt of energy to be coming from clean sources of energy. The kind of investment that is going into every kind of value chain in this particular sector is going to be humongous. Now, we have seen this playing out in the last decade, a variety of financing options coming in. Just to start with, the green bonds were the rage for a good part of time. Of course, the traditional debt instruments provided by the financial institutions like us, India Exim Bank, particularly we are in the long-term financing, 10 to 15 years or 20 years also. So that's where the requirement or all the ratios of such a projects work out better. So apart from India Exim Bank, Government of India has also put in place the NAFID, which is another financial institution looking into the infrastructure segment, which is coming into play. And today we saw their bond rising, news also coming into play. Apart from that, all the developmental banks also are coming in this space very aggressively. The African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, all of them are supporting this particular cause and have been bringing in new structures in place. For a financial institution, we need to first have a clarity on how the price discovery has happened. I think India has demonstrated it in a wonderful manner. I think the whole world is also following that particular model as well. Further, on the offtake risk, again, there is an aggregation of demand and an assurance of payment coming in by the government-led institutions are there, which is a great learning for the whole world also. Then there are insurance products which are trying to cover different kinds of risk associated with this sector. I think whatever risk mitigation measures financial institution look forwards, they are all available. Just on an end note, the kind of complexity the project can have. One of the project, one of our major customer who is actually working with this particular program is implementing a project in Australia, which is conceived in UK, funded by Korean entities, put out in Western Australia, and supported by an Indian financial institution. So this is the global situation what we are looking at.
Right, absolutely. And the risks are unique, and we can talk about that. Since we have a mix on the panel, what I want to do is I want to get the industry view first, and I'll go to Sunil at the extreme left of the panel to sort of... Sunil, the question about the transition, a lot of people only focus on the Ambani, Adani, the Jindals and all the big companies which sort of get more mind space and media share sometimes. But a lot of innovation is happening in other companies that may not be that well known or marketed. Purely from the transition that is being done by Indian companies and Indian jugaad, if I may use that word, what could you share with our audience?
So as you mentioned rightly that innovation, what has happened and the way how we have reached what we were doing 5 to 6 years back, the kind of tariff which was there in the renewable industry was even, it was more than 10 rupees. That was the tariff. And the innovation which has happened in the industry, the kind of companies which has come in these last 5 to 6 years has been able to give some innovative product to the industry, and that is the reason why today we are sitting at the tariff. I think the lowest tariff which went in India was around 1.99. So you can see starting from 15 rupees or 18 rupees, now it has touched that 1.99 also. And all this has been possible because of the continuous innovation which is happening in the industry. So as I am from the, basically from the one of the supplier of the project solar plants which is happening is major, the component is the inverter part. So I'm basically representing that company. So a lot of innovation is happening in the inverters and even in the module segment also, which is actually creating the kind of advantages which developer or EPCs can get out of it. And the reason they are optimizing their cost, the project cost they are optimizing. And based on that, I think the outcome is in front of everyone, that kind of tariff which has been invented in the industry. So this kind of things if continuously happening, so I think maybe like in industry which we have seen even in the Middle East, the tariff is even far lower than what we are operating in India. So maybe we'll see soon the days when we are maybe operating the tariff which is even lower than 1.99.
Since Sunil has spoken about tariffs, I don't know how many of you here would recall that the curve on tariffs at least that industry is talking about here, and before we started this panel this was also being discussed with other people, mirrors what happened in telecom in India, and 18 rupees was one of the earlier call rates, and you know what has happened. It's not strictly comparable, but the point is that India is such a large market that for the first few years or maybe even a decade and a half, companies, regulation, policy makers will struggle at arriving at an optimal fit. And because we are a resource dependent nation, many parts of this renewable energy industry chain, we are still dependent on overseas. Therefore, the risk and the execution challenges multiply. Mr. Roy, I'm coming to you on the point. Maybe you could explain this from your industry and the segment that you operate in, really. How significant has this transition been in India if you were to compare it globally? In many sectors, we have moved far ahead of other countries. Fintech is just one example. So using that sort of outsider's perspective, I'm asking you to explain to the lay audience here, how much have we achieved and how far is still that we need to walk on?
Thanks. So if you ask me that to what extent we have really transitioned, I think we are still, say, scratching the surface, except in one area, that we have been the world leader in achieving the sustainable tariff, and perhaps the lowest in the world, I will say, other than, say, the Gulf region, where you have sun god really shining.
But is lowest sustainable from an operator's point of view?
Yeah, sustainable for everyone, and I'll explain that why.
Okay, yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. But if you ask me that whether we have really gone into the transition mode, perhaps still not, and I'll tell you the reason. The biggest reason is that, see, the renewable is an energy which will flow to the user in form of electron through electricity boards. Now, till the time you have a commercial entity which decides what is to be supplied and how much to be supplied, all your effort finally gets bottlenecked at that point in time. I'll just touch upon one point on finance. I can tell you one thing. There is hordes of money which is actually waiting in the pipeline to be invested in India in Indian IPPs. You are not getting them because, what do they say? Oh, you do the, say, bidding in, say, 2019. We are still waiting for PPAs to be signed in 2020, and we still have, say, in 21, I do not know whether in 21 or 22 I will be able to start the project. Why? Who decides that that project will come up finally? It is the electricity boards. So till the time you really bring the commercial entities there, we will struggle in terms of transition.
I want to interject here, since you speak about the reform of our power distribution, and by default, therefore, it really means reforming and changing the extent of state control on our distribution boards and the associated political issues. Are you therefore saying that we should not be hopeful? Because it's not happened really for the last 25 years that I have seen this subject.
Correct. And unfortunately, we still are not moving in that direction, as much I can tell you.
Okay.
Right?
So one of the future trends, Mr. Roy, since we're on that subject, what would you therefore say needs to be done to ensure that our transition is quick and long-term, sort of good for everyone?
Yeah, and that's unfortunately is say into the constitutional quagmire, if I can say, because if electricity is in, say, your state subject or concurrent subject, it is only as much where the federal government can do. You have states.
Are you saying that states are not on board with the center?
Absolutely.
Is center?
Absolutely.
Why would that be? Because I find it perplexing. The states are who actually cater to their voters, to their masses. Why wouldn't they want to adopt newer things and do that in a sustainable manner?
It's very simple, that whether you have the courage to sustain through the period when the transition really happens. Because nobody is going to like you during the transition. I'll just give you one example. So we sell power to SECI, right? And we sell power to Juvenile. If you just look at, say, the tariff, what is discovered by both of them, at times Juvenile actually beats SECI. What does it mean? It simply means that somebody has taken that pain to reform the way electricity is bought and distributed and money collected.
Okay. You want to step in and then I'll go. Yes. Yeah. We can open up. Everyone can please step in. Feel free to make this interactive.
No, I think very valid point, but there is a ray of hope in this. The central government is taking all measures to bring the state electricity companies and the distribution companies in to toe the line. I think this budget has this very specific, innovative approach of linking the state, borrowing capacity
To their
with reforms in DISCOM efficiencies. So I think that's a very innovative approach. I think we can see a lot more coming in.
I certainly hope that shows results, because I remember it was exactly 20 years ago when the new electricity policy had come in, and that had a significant chapter on distribution reforms. You wanted to come in, please. Step in, please, Shilpa. And then go ahead, it's on. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
So yeah, I was wanting to supplement what Mr. Roy said here, because what we see is that the developers today are facing multitude of challenges.
Okay, sorry, I think there's some. Yeah.
No, it's working. Hello.
Yeah.
I wanted to further add to what Mr. Roy said, that the developers today are facing multitude of challenges, and it's not, he picked up one example, I'm sure there are many, and I want to add to that example as well. But the challenges are from all quarters. So one is the DISCOMs, where the PPAs need to be signed. The PPAs are long-term PPAs. We've also seen the DISCOMs wanting to renegotiate those PPAs, where the whole financial model was built and now they want to go back on their commitments. There are other challenges of supply chain, and that is, I think, one of the major hurdles of our solar industry.
I would argue that perhaps industry will find its way around supply chain bottlenecks. Industry is very flexible, especially private sector companies are able to pivot very quickly. Perhaps there should be some sort of law that prevents a rethink. It's not cash on delivery that you change your mind and send the product back. PPAs signed by state government entities, they shouldn't be able to change them, especially if the process is fair and discovered, and minus any legal challenge to infirmities in the process, they should simply not be allowed to do that.
Also, DISCOMs have their own issues. They are debt-ridden. They have not been able to pay on time. So even if they don't go back, they still are not even able to support the projects that are in hand, that are ongoing. So that is one issue. The supply
I think
chain,
Delhi DISCOM is a good example in that regard, Shilpa. There is an element of subsidy, but if you look at it across the DISCOMs in Delhi, the subsidy is being borne by the budget in some ways, and it's not coming onto the books of the distribution company.
so I was just going to touch that topic, that how do we change this? And the way to do this is learn from these DISCOMs. One is the GUVNL, second is the Delhi. So privatization of DISCOMs have actually shown that the AT&C losses have been cut down from 55% to less than a single digit number.
Absolutely.
So that kind of change needs to come in the other state DISCOMs as well.
That's a very interesting point, and if you see that crux of the discussion so far, while we are looking at the future, the leap into the future is being held back by present day problems which are from the past. Anish, you've been listening to this, and I saw you shake your head when I said that maybe Delhi DISCOM had a better model. Expand on that.
Of course,
and feel free to disagree as much as you want to.
Not sure whether it's working.
Yeah.
Okay, right. No, I think absolutely what's been said is pertinent. But just that it's not that the states are not on board with the center. It requires time in India. Whatever changes we do are incremental and not necessarily ad hoc and completely kind of transformational. So we are very closely working with the government of India, and I think energy transition is a subject very close to the heart. So when you are talking about the DISCOMs not signing PPAs because there was no resource adequacy planning as such guidelines and as well as regulations from the center, right? So they had this kind of perceived notion that they have surplus and therefore they're not tying up or not pushing back all the PPAs, and especially the long-term PPAs at 25 years. So of course the center is working towards bringing down those PPAs to 15 years. That's one, 10 to 50 years. Secondly, there is a resource adequacy guidelines which has already been kind of drafted and it will be soon out as regulations. So that will kind of regularize the planning process, which requires, say for example, how much I need to procure in the next year to the next 5 years has to be determined through a scientific process, and that was not happening. So therefore, that will enable the DISCOMs to sign PPAs, right? And the PPAs could be of multiple nature. It not necessarily 15 years. It could be only peak. It could be round the clock. It could be only STOA, MTOA, whatever. But that will come out of a scientific model. That will perhaps see the uptake of all the renewables which has been stuck, as Mr. Roy was correctly highlighting. Though the bidding process has happened in 2019, still those PPAs are taking place and the DISCOMs are pushing back. There is perceived notion.
Yeah, complete your point. I just wanted to.
No, there's perceived notion at long period of time that renewables is not really the cost which is coming out, but a much bigger cost for the DISCOMs. That has already been showed in several modeling exercises. No, renewables is the cheapest cost of electricity. Even if you add all the transmission and other things as well, still it forms the cheapest cost.
No,
So
that was my next question, and I'm glad you picked it up. We'll go across the panel, starting with you on this point. Explain the numbers, if you can, off the top of your head, in terms of why you say that renewables are not costly. I'll just give you one quick example. When there was a debate in the Indian Railways with regard to reducing diesel consumption, I think at one point of time the peak annual bill used to range well over near to 5,000 crore, the diesel annual consumption of the railways, and there was a lot of internal discussion on electrification. One of the opposing views within the railways on electrification was the initial cost and the switchover cost. And I think that battle has still not been won within the railways. But using that as an example in the simplest manner that you can, explain to us in the pricing matrix, where does renewables stand?
Yeah, no, so leave aside the must-run status, and renewables will always form is actually outside the merit order. Leave that. But if you do any kind of merit order stacking, including all the renewable costs, which is discovered, say 2.7, 2.8, right now, the alternative is what we have is, say, for example, hydro, coal, nuclear, and anything if you stack up. So even if, say, for example, thermal new built coal stations, coal-based thermal stations would be somewhere around 4.5 rupees to 5 rupees, right? So that's the levelized cost of electricity, whereas over here it's around 2.7, 2.8. Now the transmission cost also, if you add with the utilization factor, that's also somewhere around 1 rupee, 1.2 rupees. So even if we add that, under all circumstances in all modeling exercises, renewables is becoming the cheapest cost of electricity to be added going forward. Now the challenge
is there a number that you can share, let's say, looking forward, 2025, what's like a per unit cost that you can average out?
Yeah, no, so there are several projections how renewables will behave, but the kind of scale which we are talking about in energy transition, as I was saying, so 2070 net zero ambitions which the government has. Today we are 120 gigawatt of renewables. We are talking about 2,000 gigawatt of solar alone which is required, somewhere around 700 gigawatt of wind which is onshore, 170 gigawatt of offshore, and somewhere around 500 gigawatt of battery storage. These are some of the numbers which have come out in modeling to achieve a net zero target of 2070, right? So this includes like green hydrogen and all that, and for that, somewhere around another 600, 700 gigawatt of renewables what is required. So if you are talking about this kind of scale, then of course the numbers which are today at 2 rupees or 2.5 rupees, that's definitely going to come down. Right?
Sunil, you were coming. Yeah, and Mr. Roy after that.
As he was mentioning about the challenges, DISCOM fights and other things which are happening. It is not holding these projects, also impacting the supply chain process. It is also holding the investment, which should come actually from outside India, because we have limited technology available in India, so we need to get the more investment. So when we are talking about the investment in India, we are getting the investment, but when we see these kind of uncertainties in the market, these kind of fights or some uncertainties which has been created by DISCOMs and the government, so this create the confusion kind of things for the investor also, who has to get the investment in India.
Right.
And I'm not sure we want definitely the tariff should get better, what is there on today, but these issues need to be addressed on priority so that all the investors, as a manufacturer, we also want to invest more money in India.
Right.
But sometimes we face these kind of challenges. We want to recruit more people we want to bring more we want to create more big setup here. But sometimes because of projects are getting delayed by 1 year or 2 year, extension keeps on coming. So these kind of steps sometimes blocks these kind of investment which should come to India.
Mr. Roy, you
Yeah, so I'd just like to add, say, one thing on the cost. And we need to be, say, fair to ourselves, fair to the state electricity boards. So renewable power, is it, say, the lowest cost energy? My answer is clearly no. And I'll tell you why. If I need to supply you, let us say, 4 units and 1 unit, say, every 1/4 of the day, if my source can supply, say, 2 units in 50% of the time, now somebody is keeping something warm to supply you in those when I'm not available, right? So the cost of keeping that backup, that definitely need to be added and added transparently into that.
Okay.
Because then basically you see the cost of renewable. Maybe you need to incentivize or you need to, say, pass on something to state electricity board where they are encouraged that, okay, if I'm buying at 2 rupees, somebody is paying me for what I'm not getting. There's another issue here that, see, and that's possible today. We have, say, all kinds of the smart transmission, smart metering and all. We need to identify the customer segments who are not really the continuous users of the energy. And if we can really have dedicated infrastructure for those where they are basically, say, consuming that energy when it is getting consumed, you then separate out the cost for the other segment, right? So some kind of different energy accounting is really required over there. I would just like to add one point to the electricity boards. We talked about it. The fundamental issue is that is a government entity will ever be able to run a, say, distribution business efficiently? If not, you will always have issue. And your biggest issue will always come in form of dearth of capital, which basically drives everything.
Right.
So that's the fundamental at the electricity boards. But electricity cost for the renewable, that's definitely significant than what it looks like.
I want to add another element here, unless the panel wants to debate this point, and this is, again, to try and keep this simple for a wider audience. Our hill states, many decades ago, chose to focus on renewable energy in terms of hydro projects. Himachal and Uttarakhand and a little bit of Jammu and Kashmir focused on this. There were other projects as well. In the most recent past, we have seen this controversy around hydropower in Uttarakhand with regard to the environmental concerns. The question I'm asking the panel, and this hopefully will tell us about the reality, is about the other costs in some ways or impact of one of the components of renewable, hydro, which I believe will increasingly perhaps go out of favor due to the environmental degradation and fears that it is stoking. Is that a fair question to ask? Do you want to, yeah, Shilpa, you want to go first and then we'll open up the, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think it's very important that we keep an eye. It's a very, very relevant and important question at this stage. While we are transitioning, are we doing it equitably? Are we doing it sustainably? So the cost at which we are building this has got a huge price to be paid. And that is where I think inclusivity comes in. So what I believe is that there's a lot that can be done. You talked about hydro. So we will come to the future in a bit, but pumped hydro, for example, is a very good storage option. It is a closed loop system. It uses power when there is the power demand is less, and it gives power when the power demand is more. And that kind of innovative solution is what will help us to transition sustainably. Another thing, all of these technologies that we are talking about, they need mining. They need extraction. So the entire extractionism is going to be a question. We shouldn't end up hurting the ecosystem while building a better ecosystem. So the existing ecosystem that needs to be taken care of, there's again a lot that can be done. The mining industry, for example, you can have a tracking mechanism. Like the diamond industry, they found a way to blockchain monetization of their, to make sure that the undesirable diamonds do not come in the mainstay. So something like that for the current mining processes that this whole technology building is going to need.
Okay.
So those are, I mean, there are many things that can be done, but these are things we should look at, inclusivity and making sure that your supply chains are pure.
I have a different point of view here. Putting this particular instance of Joshimat, it may not be an outcome of a single activity of a particular project, or
exactly.
harvesting hydropower project, harvesting hydropower from a resource available there. The people of Delhi would like to travel in 100-kilometer speed even up to Badrinath. It's our expectation which is actually driving these hilly states, not really, taking care of their ecological considerations and kind of, going for 4-lane expansion, rail network into the young Himalayan mountains. I think we need to have this, a big clarity on what are the development needs of a particular region or a country or a continent. What works for India, what may not work for Africa, what works for US may not work for India. I think we have clearly seen this aspect since we are a policy bank for Government of India. We have seen a lot of projects which we are supporting outside India and in our neighborhood. That's the best resource available, hydropower.
Yes.
In Nepal or Bhutan, they're actually adding a huge amount of revenue to the coffers of the state and also supporting Indian development story.
Okay.
So it's a win-win situation to kind of collaborate on that aspect. But I think we must not let go
your
of
point is that hydro also has a part in the renewable future of India.
Yeah, and no financier, at least the financiers of a good stature, would be going with a blind eye without having a due diligence on the environment and other things, will not be supporting any such project. So if those considerations are kept in mind, I think all these developments are welcome.
Anish, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, I think just a small point, Siddharth, thanks. Is basically, I think what has happened in the Western world is hydro and pump storage were always developed as federal assets, right? Because they, as a country, always took a view that that's important for energy security and probably the cost will be much higher than going on a merit order pathway. So those were mostly developed on a federal way. So therefore, from that perspective, I think Government of India should think of coming out with a hydro policy, or HPO is already under task. But I'm saying somewhere Government of India's funds needs to be utilized, looking at all the environmental aspects, of course, taking care of that, but not necessarily equating hydro and pump storage with any other alternative sources, because that's required for our energy security. That's the only.
Yep.
I just wanted to add one thing about, say, this hydro projects and in the eco-fragile zone. I think my professional experience has been that the project assessment technically has not been as robust, and there have been two reasons. One, our knowledge about, say, especially our side of the Himalayas has not been really very great. If you look at all the projects of 25 years, why they basically have suffered cost overrun, not because somebody was, say, adding cost, because when you go and get inside, suddenly you learn geology is something completely different. What it means, we need to now develop perhaps far robust, say, method of assessing the projects and denying some of those projects, right? Today we have technologies fortunately available for that, one. Second, we have experiences from the other projects.
No, but is there a example nearby? Because the Himalayas are in this region, we can't compare it to the Rocky Mountains.
No, yeah.
But what are you therefore saying? Are we kind of lacking in the engineering element in some ways?
In the DPR preparation.
Shilpa?
Yeah, I just want to add to that this is a very important point. We as investors, we as consumers must actually demand that the electricity that we get, or whatever the product that I get today, is being made with environmentally sustainable mechanism throughout. The back-end supply chain also
that's a
needs
good
to be
point.
looked into.
We pay a premium in restaurants for organic food, so maybe we should be prepared to pay a premium for organic electricity. My words, really. Okay. So far, in terms of the future trends, what I have understood here, are two, three major concerns, and I recap that as we enter the last part of our discussion. One is there is definitely a fix required when it comes to the last mile, which is the distribution mechanism, the ownership of that distribution mechanism, how it is structured, the kind of investment that goes into continuously maintaining and upgrading a world-class distribution network, and there are center state issues. The second thing which after the recent crisis, and I'm glad I asked this question, it helps me get the sense of the panel is that hydro will stay. Again, there are certain things that are required. Let's look at the other things, and again, Sunil, I'll start with you. I first saw a solar cooker in my house where on the first floor in the balcony, potatoes and dal and rice would get boiled, and it used to taste different for some reason. And that was a very nice solar cooker. It was basically a tin contraption with a thick sheet of glass. And then we didn't see that happen. I've also seen some amount of, the internet is full of lots of conspiracy theories, but about how there were electric engines that were used for transport many, many decades ago. That didn't happen because the technology and the adoption and the cost was not mainstream. How far are we from solar being mainstream in India as far as the average retail consumer is concerned? Please leave out the companies that say, okay, our rooftop will be solar, we will have acres of land where we'll put solar panels and do something. That's not for the average person. But when it comes to the average consumer, when will solar become mainstream for them?
Siddharth, what I see is basically what solar cooker you're talking, I think maybe 20-25 years back when we used to discuss about this solar cooker, that and many other items were there which were getting maybe in the kitchen or maybe somewhere as some toys or something like that using the solar panels. That time actually the attraction was the solar, because solar was something new in the industry and people were liking like what exactly new is there. So they want to save, and that's why they were using the solar cooker. So in the past few years we have seen the kind of knowledge people has gained in the solar industry. Even in the normal market scenario also, if you'll see that lot of education, people are getting the education on the solar now. And in the recent, I think if we talk about recently, we can see many even air conditioner also. Nowadays we can see the solar air conditioner also coming. So many new components are coming, but I think it's all about the adoption. Gradually, indirectly, instead of that solar cooker was saving something in form of electricity or something, but now rooftop and all those utility scale of points, they are already providing the power to the consumer. But still anyways, I think there are many other solar products are already coming in the market. So hopefully, I think it will take time, but we are hopeful that a lot of products we can see in the solar segment related to these kind of.
Mr. Roy, that same question to you, try and demystify it, because I don't want an industry to industry conversation. It should be for the average viewer.
Yeah, I think, I understood your question. So whether we will have, say, ACs, cookers, and several, say, appliances which run with electricity running on solar. I think that's going to be difficult for the simple reason that the amount of energy what you need to run those, right? And the amount of area what you need. And then as a consumer at home, you will never like to, okay, now let us really put this thing in under the sun and all. So energy generated by renewable source is going to remain the staple. Perhaps appliances we are going to get more efficient, but unlikely that they will largely move to the solar.
When do you think energy generated from a mix of renewable sources, not just one, will cross the threshold versus conventional sources, which is largely thermal?
Yeah, I think to a really large extent, governments, whether state or federal, they need to invest in, say, the storage technologies. And by no means I am saying battery. It could be pump, it could be, say, your hydrogen, because you need somewhere to store something to supply during 60% of the time. I mean, look at the Germany. So Germany today is kind of so we are consuming approximately, say, 12% of our energy mix coming from renewable sources. Forget about the capacity. Germany has gone up to 49%. But then what happened? Their thermal plants have started getting back down where it was, say, economically not sustainable for them to keep running, right? Then they came up with some technologies and all. But the issue is that the moment you go beyond 40, you need somewhere to store that energy. And storage has a cost.
Okay.
That somebody has to do.
On storage, in fact, and if you could expand on that, because that's one part which we have not discussed. Again, demystify storage. For the average person, it is the battery that they use in their car or for some other purposes as well. I'm not even talking about phone batteries.
Siddharth, just before that, on the adoption possibilities and the increase in adoption rate of solar or, the green energy possibilities, I think we need to shift a focus a little bit on from the domestic segment to the places where this can work. The solar energy particularly, where the ambient radiation is available for a good part of time, and the activities are also aligned with it. And I see agriculture, which is one of the huge consumer of electricity, and it is also kind of, the drag on the discoms, that being a very early adopter in terms of a larger set of population going in for it. Now the Kusum scheme is there. I think it has driven the solar pumps to a good part of India. I think once there are benefits realized by farmers, a word of mouth is sufficient. So I feel there is going to be a huge number of solar pumps replacing the regular electricity connection. And that would also, bring in a lot of semblance of order with respect to electricity tariffs and free bids, tariffs and all. I mean, free electricity and all. The second point, in fact, one of our, customer, it's a startup. They have started providing a disaggregated solution or a standalone solution for cold storage. Multi-chamber cold storage solution which can be put in a farm. It's a containerized, solar-powered and stored coolant kind of a solution. So which works for the farmer. He don't need to invest, crores of rupees. You just need to invest on that one container, maybe in few lakhs, and it works for his produce, which is grown in, say, 2 or 3 acres or 5 acres. So this is where we can see a huge change being, brought in with respect to the agriculture and the adoption by them.
Okay.
Now,
please finish your point and then.
Yeah. On the storage point of, that discussion is very difficult at this point of time for India. We are completely dependent on outside or not so friendly countries. We don't have today a reasonable access to the key ingredients or even the refining technologies as well. I think that's the biggest hurdle we need to cross at this point of time.
That's a very good point, and there was a small bit of news just yesterday about a deposit of a particular mineral that has been found in the state that I hail from. But Shilpa, you wanted to come in and then we'll let Anish have the final word.
Yeah, I just want to add to the last point and then we move to the storage. So when we'll see the end user really utilizing solar as an option is where I want to come in. So I believe that unless we give the user an option which is better than the existing option, you cannot really expect a wide adoption. So what you need to do is not just the products, but make a system that is a two-way communication. I'm talking of the grid again. A system where which can communicate both ways, power as well as communication. And that is when and then start the net metering concept, which had started long ago in Germany, led to a wide adoption for the rooftop solar. So in India, if we want to achieve that, then our grids need to be much more sustainable than they are. And the other point, I'll just build on that meanwhile, apply it where it is working, where it will need, which is industry. Industry has a huge opportunity to switch to renewable energy as a source. Wherever, for example, wherever there are heat requirements, generate that heat from renewable instead of fossil.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right. I think, just wanted to say that the entire energy transition could be solved if you have energy storage, right? So that's the verdict in that sense. So we all know that energy storage is required because of the various challenges what renewables has. What government of India is priority and I would say focus is, of course, to promote pump storage because, as rightly said, that we are completely dependent on some other critical minerals which comes from other countries. So that's the way it has gone about. So if you see, almost like 130 new projects have got registered in the last couple of years itself in developing pump storages across the country. So that's a positive development, and the technologies have also now become much more, I would say, advanced in that sense. Earlier pump storages were developed in 5-6 years. Now they're talking about 3-4 years. So yeah, I think the focus around pump storage is the right way till the time we have a permanent solution to go towards battery storage or anything else.
Absolutely, and all of you must have understood virtually hundreds of years, decades of being used to a certain energy supply system, right from the feedstock to how it is metered and billed and paid for, and now a transition which is being driven by private industry along with the pockets of the government that at the state level and of course the center, which is completely focused on this subject. But it's complex, multiple moving pieces, and what industry and ultimately will work for the consumer is a clear set of policies which are not changed and contracts which are honored. I think one of the key things about the future should also, as we end this discussion, is sanctity of contracts in a very, very complex, challenging, capital intensive and technology intensive sector. I'm going to thank my panel for their time and thoughts, and you, the viewer, for staying tuned in. With that, it's a wrap on this session. We'll come back with more. Back to you.
Thank you very much, panelists, for that very engaging conversation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the next fireside chat on ushering solar and clean tech growth for Atmanirbhar Bharat, I'm going to be inviting on stage Mr. Karshad Daruwala, who's the chairman of Sterling and Wilson Group, a man of many firsts.